Lord, we pray for change that will be lasting, especially when it concerns the schools. Bless Steve as he shares tonight in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Yeah, topic discussion tonight is not the schools. Did I tell you? Did I leave a voicemail about that?
No, but we can just call meetings and stuff.
About schools?
Uh-huh.
Not what I'm working on.
No, this is the Board of Education.
This is the State Board of Education.
Oh, okay.
And
No.
I was going to
Well,
give you this.
sure. Thank you.
Just be aware of that.
Well, I just got out of a meeting with public school administrators, superintendents, and principals regarding a concept which is, my leading thought is property tax exemptions for individuals who are not using the public school system. If you're not using the service, you shouldn't have to pay for it, was the thought. So that, of course, was a lead balloon with them, as I knew it would be, but I think that taking money from taxpayer A in order to educate person B's child is a breach on the proper role of government. So anyway, yeah, I had that conversation going into the Lion's Den, and it was regarding schools. So I'll read this to you. Thank you, Carl. But tonight we are talking about taxes as it relates from our recent budget is the main topic. If you have a paper, I will get into some stuff where you might want to take notes, particularly tonight. But there are 5 changes to taxation in Michigan that I want to discuss. The first 3 being good, and the last 2 being taxing or revenue increases. So the first 3 are on overtime, Social Security, and tipped wages. There's 68 different industries with tipped wages that are going to be exempt from taxes now. The most typical one would be your restaurant workers. The money that they get in taxes would not be tipped. That would be coupling or joining in with President Trump's concept on all 3 of these to say that they should not be taxed on their tips. The other one for Social Security for Tier 3, that's people who were born after 1952 is Tier 3. And right now there's 2 different routes that you can go. Either you can take a $20,000 deduction or a broad Social Security deduction, one or the other. What we did is we made it to where you can get both for people in Tier 3. And so that's that one. The last one being on overtime, getting tax breaks from the money on your overtime pay. So those are 3 equating to a total of about $179 million in tax relief for the people of Michigan from those 3 combined. And so remember that 179 million number, because the other 2, and then there's going to be add-ons too. The other 2 main ones are on marijuana, 24% wholesale tax. Ironically, believe it or not, the revenue generated is supposed to be $420 million from the wholesale tax. You can't make it up. For those of you who know what 420 means, it's a marijuana number. I think we all probably know. But anyway, 420, the origin of it, which most people don't know, but 420 was a time after school where decades ago, teenagers would meet at 4:20 p.m. is my understanding of where that term 420 came from, because you met in the woods at 420. Anyway, 420 is the marijuana number. But a 24% wholesale tax, they already have a 10% sin tax on retail, and they pay the 6% sales tax as well. I don't smoke marijuana. I don't advocate the use of it, but it's your pursuit of your happiness, not my pursuit of your happiness. That's my perspective on it. And they're already taxed more than other goods are, so they already have that 10% tax. I think we're going in the wrong direction by adding another 24% tax on it. And I know that's, a thing that a lot of conservatives will disagree with in terms of the use of marijuana. Right, wrong, or indifferent, it's kind of like the fireworks used to be, where people used to go down to Indiana to buy their fireworks and then smuggle them back up into Michigan. Well, we see a lot of the marijuana shops around here because coincidentally there's a lot of Indiana and Ohio people who are coming up here to buy their marijuana and then smuggling it back down south. So there's going to be a lot of, my understanding of that 420 million number is it's a static economic analysis, at least largely, meaning that they're saying if we take the economic output that we had today and apply that 24% wholesale tax, that it would generate 420 million. But to assume a static economic situation or climate would largely be irrational, because either less will be sold in this way because the cost goes up, and or people will be likely to go to the black market, and we'll just lose out the tax revenue from the people who go to the black market. So the theory is that 420 million is probably an over projection of what we will actually get in revenue from it. And the other main one is something about decoupling from the big beautiful bill, and that is regarding corporate income taxes and deductions that you can take. Instead of over 5 years, you can take them all over 1 year. It changed the concept with that. But the big beautiful bill changed it to where you can do it in 1 year, and we chose as a state of Michigan to decouple from that, meaning that we break away from the federal government's plan, because the way we did the deductions was just to follow the federal government. Well, since the federal government changed, the state of Michigan was going to change along with them unless we decouple or break away. We chose through the budget negotiation effort to break away from President Trump's plan with that, which reinstates about $540 million in revenue for the state of Michigan for this upcoming fiscal year. So that 420 plus 540, that adds up to 960 million in increased revenue for the state of Michigan from those two actions. And we had that 179 million number from the other three. So there's a net of over $700 million in increased revenue from those 5 actions. There are some much more de minimis in size and scope changes that we made last minute. And those were, one example is, so there's something called a sunset. A sunset is where you have something that's in effect for a certain number of years, but then after, it's kind of like a pilot program or something. And then after that certain number of years, it sunsets, or when the sun goes down on it, it no longer is in effect, and that goes away. So there's some fees that Deagle was receiving, for example, that were set to sunset in this upcoming year. And we chose, as a legislature, not me, we chose to extend, as part of the budget negotiation effort, to extend those fees. So instead of them sunsetting away, those fees are going to continue into perpetuity. And my Republican colleagues almost unanimously are like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, it's part of the budget negotiation, sure, I'll vote yes on that bill. Say, you don't have to vote yes on that bill. Well, I'm a yes on the budget, so I need to be a yes on this. No, you don't have to be. Oh, well, they expect me to be a yes. Who does? Leadership expects me to be a yes. Well, so you can't vote your conscience on it? Like, if you are going to be a yes on the overall budget, can you maybe just be a yes on the budget then, but vote no on extending those fees? People's done enough damage to the state of Michigan to vote to continue their fees that they can impose on society instead of letting them phase away. I just don't see the logical rationale as a Republican in extending the fees. As a Democrat, more revenue for the state of Michigan, that's more their mindset than it is ours as conservatives. So there were about 6 or 7 bills where we extended sunsets, but those are maybe a $5 million impact or a $2 million impact here or there, much smaller numbers than 420 or 540. But those all equated into the overall budget process. And that's probably about it in terms of the update, in terms of those taxes. We can try to dig into those further if you want to. But this is where you want to get out your paper, if you have any paper. I have, Carl, do you have one? This is front and back. I didn't know if you had any. You might want to utilize sitting around the room.
Ask them.
Anybody needs paper?
And then maybe they can rip it in half too if they want to rip that in half. That'll be very helpful for people. Thank you, Carl. Anybody else want any paper? All right. So there's a formula I came up with because my first 4 years in the legislature, largely as we go through the budget, it just kind of feels as if the mindset is, how much are we going to decide to spend this year? Largely seems like that's our decision-making and our rationale. But what I'm starting to look at differently is going back to basic algebra and thinking, what is the dependent and what is the independent variable? algebraic equation y equals mx plus b. What is the dependent and what's the independent variable in y equals mx plus b? Anybody want to take a crack at it? It's been a while.
It's a slope.
It does create the slope, yes. But with y or x, which one's dependent, which one's independent?
The X is the independent variable.
Yes, very good. X is the independent variable and y is the dependent variable. Y depends on the value of x. Y is a function of x. And when we look at how much money we spend as a state of Michigan, on one end we have our expenditures, and on the other end we have our income or our revenue as a state. Which one is the dependent variable and which one is the independent variable between our spend column and our revenue generation column as a state? Which one depends on the other?
The income would be the one that is stable, and the other one depends on it, but that's probably not the case, is it?
I like that answer. I agree. How much we get to spend is dependent on how much money we bring in. That's basically what you said. Does that make sense? Yeah, so I agree that how much we get to spend is dependent on what we bring in. We can change how much money we bring in by raising taxes or lowering taxes, but those are the independent variable that we get to decide as a legislature. The dependent variable, how much money we have, is dependent on what we bring in. Very good. So, that y equals mx plus b, I came up with a new equation to determine how much revenue we're going to have as the state of Michigan, and I'll just share that with you guys tonight. Some of you may have seen the live stream on this, but the formula is R new, for R and then a little NEW, but you can just, that doesn't matter too much. The revenue equals raise, R-A-I-S-E. After the R, put in a plus sign. After the A, put a plus sign. After the I, put a minus sign. And after the S, put a plus sign. So the new revenue equals the old revenue plus added revenue plus changes from inactivity minus subtracted revenue plus external forces from the federal government. Very complicated, but we'll go through all 5 of them. So the new revenue is going to equal what the revenue was for the past year. That's that first R. That's the R in raise. So the old revenue plus A, to go through A again, that's additional revenue. We saw some additional revenue from what we talked about earlier?
Marijuana tax.
Marijuana. So we had $420 million for the A there, and then we also had another number.
The corporate.
Break.
Decoupling.
Decoupling from Big Beautiful Bill, which was $540 million. Good. So we had $960 million for A there, plus some de minimis ones where we extended the sunsets. But if you want to just forget about those, we'll say 960. We can say 960 for the value of A. I is the most complicated part of the equation. I is just what happens from the market running its course. It's from inaction from the government, just people moved out of the state of Michigan, well, perhaps because the economy is bad because of Gretchen Whitmer, but market forces and market is doing market things. People spending more of their money or choosing to be in a holding pattern, more inflation, things that aren't a direct impact of, they're an indirect impact from government forces, sure, but they're not direct government action, is I. I is largely an estimation that our revenue estimating conference would have to go through to basically predict what change is going to happen just from the market doing market things. That's I. Minus S. S is, I mentioned earlier, but that one's fairly straightforward. Does anybody want to suggest what S is? We're subtracting S.
The sunset.
Nope. What was A?
Additional.
A was additional revenue. So S is subtracted revenue. So things like lost revenue from us doing the no tax on tips, from the overtime, and from Social Security for Tier 3.
So the 179.
179, yeah. And of course, I said minus. I mean, you can do a plus sign there and do plus and negative. It's whatever. It's minus 179. And then plus E. E is the external government action. And the external government would be the federal government. Unique circumstance, the Big Beautiful Bill, had we chose not to decouple from it, the E in this circumstance would have been a negative 540 million. All we had to do is sit on our hands and take the $540 million victory for the upcoming year. It does impact how much revenue we bring in later years, sure, but a lot of companies will want to take that deduction all in the first year, and it's largely been better if we had not done it. So, but anyway, E would be negative 540 in this circumstance. So our new revenue equals the old revenue plus added revenue plus just changes from inaction minus the subtracted revenue plus the external forces. So that 540 number showed up twice in the equation, once under A and once under E. So plus 540 under A and minus 540 under E, because we chose to decouple. Had we not chosen to decouple, then we would not have had that 540 under A, we would have just had a negative 540 under E. So, what made me think of this equation? Well, I'm just scratching my head because I'm thinking, we're talking about a budget that's going to be lower than last year when Republicans had the House and Senate. My first term, it went up quickly. Gretchen Whitmer was governor, but so that happened, and that was frustrating, and I felt like it was fiscally irresponsible. Then the Democrats, it kind of plateaued a little bit last term, and the Democrats had the trifecta, but they want to look more conservative and reasonable, and I said, well, maybe that's it. And then the more I thought about it in this equation, it's like, we only get to spend what we bring in. And there's market forces that impact how much revenue we're going to have as a state, which that is a key qualifier to all of this. Article 5, Section 18 of the Michigan Constitution says we have a balanced budget clause. And I forgot to mention that earlier. The U.S. government, they spend whatever they want, and we run deficits, and we're in debt. We don't get to be in debt in the state of Michigan. We have to balance our budget every year. So that's a good thing. I like that. But that puts that makes this equation make sense. It wouldn't make sense if we could spend more than we brought in revenue. But the reason why our revenue is down has stabilized and kind of is looking like it's going down for not only this year but the next few years. Any guesses?
People leaving.
That's one reason. That would be under I. Anything else?
Well, the federal government's not giving out as much money as they used to.
Correct.
The COVID during the
Yes.
lost so much money given out. We're not getting that anymore.
Very good. That's the main reason. Is the post-COVID era is starting to stabilize again. So naturally, our budget was going to come down. That wasn't our decision. The only way that we had any decision in it was if we were going to raise more revenue streams, and we chose to. So had we just taken the victory of where we were, we could have a budget that was, we'll say, $1.3 billion less than last year. But because we chose to mess with our revenue streams, our budget's only about $600 or $700 million less than last year. We could have taken that victory and been like, hey, government's going to get smaller. Let's just take it. I would rather have less taxes and less spending. Democrats would rather have more taxes and more spending. How about we just agree and say, let's just keep tax levels where they are and take the victory of government getting smaller? We had the leverage, but we squandered half of it. And that was the odd thing that I was hearing. Leadership would say things like, for every dollar in cut that we get to the budget, the deal would be an extra dollar in revenue. The Democrats want a dollar in revenue for every dollar that we cut. Doesn't that sound counterintuitive? But when you look at this formula and you see that we were destined to have a $1.3 billion smaller budget, then you realize, oh, well, then I guess that does make sense. For every dollar, they would kind of meet in the middle at about $650 or $700 million. We might, instead of having a $1.3 billion reduction, we increased revenue to get it back up towards closer to where it was going to be from what it was last year. Not what it was going to be, but what it was last year. And anyway, it took me just going back to basic algebra to figure this out and come up with this equation and share it with a few colleagues. I didn't think it was falling on deaf ears, but apparently it did. It's complicated. It's actually basic algebra, but especially that I number. I is so complicated. Like, nobody knows what the value of I is. That's market projections. But we do have the House Fiscal Agency and the economists in Lansing who are tasked with what's called CREC. It's the Revenue Estimating Conference. They do it twice a year, January and May. ones who confer and deliberate and say, based on what we're seeing, based on market projections, this is the amount of revenue the state of Michigan is going to have. Ceteris paribus, all else held equal unless we raise or lower tax streams. And in those revenue estimating conferences, they make a report, and then in those reports and everything, we have the money that we're projected to bring in, and then we're supposed to follow those in terms of our budget making decisions. So if the revenue estimating conference says we're going to have less money, and we try to spend more money, we would not be in compliance with Article 5, Section 18 of the Michigan Constitution that says we're supposed to be within our bounds for our estimated spend. So, anyway, that is it. We will open it up for questions, thoughts, and perspectives.
One thing we just ran into is that Michigan adopted the new ESRI code, which is actually energy code. Usually we've been dealing with insulation, added insulation through the years, and it just worse and worse and worse. And now we're just up in buildings full of insulation, and they've cut holes in it and put fans. But they just adopted this thing called the blower door test, which they do on a house. They probably did it on your house, where once you get the house all done, of course you got drywall on the walls, and so as long as the air doesn't go through the drywall around the windows, you put up so many pounds of pressure onto it. It's not that much pressure, but if you have an 80,000 square foot building, somehow you get to seal that whole thing up, and how do you seal the dock levelers and the overhead doors and all this kind of stuff. So it's going to be just, there might be 10,000 buildings, commercial buildings going in the state of Michigan at any one time or more. And it's going to take a month or two extra on every building. And then it costs maybe $30,000 on every building that's going to go. By the time you have to hire an outside person to come in and do the blower door test. And it's just a giant fiasco. The building inspectors don't want to do it, but the state code commission adopted it, and they had hearings. I guess I could have went to one of those hearings.
$30,000 for a house?
No, for a house it's like $2,000. But when you've got a 70,000 square foot building, that's a big deal. And it's what it is. It's not the insulation value. It's a film that you have to build into the building that is to get this blower door test up to. It's about a tenth of a pound you have to get it up to. But the problem is that you physically can't do this on a big building. So if you had a 300,000 square foot building, how are you going to do a blower door test on this where you build the pressure up in the building? But what if you had 15 dock levels? Well, dock seals aren't designed they're just not designed to keep the cold out, not to keep pressure in the building. So what do you do with that? And you have to hire an outside person. There's only 3 people that do it. One in Valparaiso, one in Grand Rapids, one in the Detroit area. So if you had 10,000 buildings and 3 people that do this stupid stuff, and you don't have to be licensed to do this blower door test, you got to be an expert. That's what you got to do. So the state we just got hooked on one in Portage, but this stupid building inspector here in Sturgis has decided that he's going to do that on all the buildings too. So every commercial industrial building is going to have a huge amount of extra costs.
Right.
And these greenies want to put this stuff in, and it's not insulation value at all. It has nothing to do with insulation value. It has to do with the membrane in the whole building. So.
Right. Yeah. And whether it's a
That's
fee or a regulation that costs money,
Yeah.
it's a burden on the employer or
in fact, big time.
Yeah.
And it was just a construction code division, a commission, I don't know, 6 guys or something, whatever they did, they adopted this in the new ESRI, which is ESRI is the insulation code. But we've been dealing with the insulation. We're putting R42 or so on the roof on a commercial building and R20 on a sidewall, and now we got this membrane, this layer of seal that has to go on the whole outside of the building. And what do you do on overhead doors? How do you seal them up? But then a plastics factory, and you also have to have pressure intake on all buildings, so to make up for that it being too tight. So houses were bad enough, but now industrial commercial buildings, it's physically not possible to do with the number of people you've got actually doing it. But no, of course, going to court is the first one. Most inspectors aren't doing it yet, but they're all going to do it. They're going to force it with the state. Because the state construction code, the state inspectors control everything, and they're pushing it down everybody's throat, so.
And that's already taken effect, or is
It's taken, okay, yeah, 40 inches is the first one we got. And, which we didn't expect it yet, you know, we kinda knew there was something out there, but now everybody's gonna do it, they're all gonna be forced into doing it,
Yeah.
every building.
Burdensome towards productivity in the marketplace.
Oh, yes, and it's not the building you don't need for it, because you bring fresh air in the building, and most industrial buildings are exhaust.
Yeah, it's off on a different topic, and if you want to share your feedback on this, but as the government continues to overregulate, if we instead had a private sector building where, let's say if insurance companies were saying, we want to see that you're accredited by this voluntary association who's going to make sure the building's built right,
Yeah.
and if they're going to insure you, they want you to get that stamp of approval from that voluntary, inspection, accreditation association.
Oh, we have Factory Mutual that does that, if you're you get cheaper insurance if you go with Factory Mutual. Costs a lot more money, some of us went with Factory Mutual, and it costs a lot more money to have that Factory Mutual rating, wind loading on the corners of the building, and just everything. There's all kinds of stuff, you have to submit all your building plans to Factory Mutual, and
Okay.
they're an insurance underwriter is what they are. And you can save a lot of money. Some homeowners are saving millions every year on doing it, but then they got 18 plants.
Yeah, the more that the market took care of that, and insurance companies wanted to make sure that you were certified that the building was built right, and they have their, that type of situation,
Yeah.
instead of the government telling us how we can and can't build a
Yeah.
building.
And you got your choice whether you want to do it or not,
Right,
so.
right, exactly.
Well, a few years ago, we had a new shower installed in our house. And part of the deal, the company that did that, they said, we can do this test that he's talking about to see how airtight it is, and then put pressure in the house. And it was a free thing. It was a free thing. Put it one part of the install, which was surprising to me. But what I want to bring up is the fact that during the winter years when we had COVID, so many small businesses were closed. I mean, they actually went out of business. And so that is a direct loss of revenue in our state. Either they moved to a different state or they just, they just closed.
Correct.
And so that had to have an impact.
Yeah, but surprisingly, it had less of an impact than you would think, because in the revenue estimating conference, they anticipated that type of reduction, but we didn't recognize it, again, because of the federal ARPA dollars. There was so much stimulus money that was injected in the economy. They were projecting economic downturns, but there were slight economic upticks because people were spending this federal cash that was pumped in the economy, Keynesian style economics, and that held up. And that actually created, this is a further tangent, but not too complicated, one is lapsed funds. So this concept of lapsed funding, or lapsed funds, is we lapsed about 230, it's either 236 or 239 $1 million for this fiscal year. So basically, we had a revenue estimating conference, we put out the budget that we did, and we kept 236 or 239 million on the balance sheet that we did not appropriate to spend anywhere. That number historically used to be much smaller, like between maybe 10 and maybe 50, maybe 100 million at the most. But post-COVID, the number was actually in the billions. We had that number was really racked up higher about 2 or 3, 4 years ago. And then that number's come down from about 3 billion, 2 billion. It was roughly, so actually, 2 years ago, it was 2.1 billion. Last year was 800, but last year isn't finalized until about April. There's some adjustments that can still be done for this fiscal year that just ended September 30th. So those numbers aren't fully calibrated yet, but those numbers are estimated to be around 850 million or something like that from last year's lapsed funds. And then this upcoming year is estimated to be about 239 million. But again, you have all those market projections and predictions. As much as we say 239, we won't know until about March or April of 2027 whether or not this current fiscal year we just started is 239 or is it a little bit higher or a little bit lower.
How many pockets of money are still left and stuff?
14. Sorry. Pockets of money left.
Yeah, well, they have lots of pockets of money, like the $2 billion the lady from got
For Canada.
from Georgia, she got $2 billion. You know, what I'm talking about, the prosecutor or whatever it was, and she got $2 billion. Now, a lot of that money's not spent yet. They're trying to claw it back. And I'm sure we got stuff in the state of Michigan that was handed out to people's friends and may have never been spent. Is there anything out there yet?
There is some clawback stuff, and my understanding with the UIA is that's one example where apparently some people were given money from unemployment claims that were fraudulent claims, and so I think that was, what was it, 375,000 in the state of Michigan. They're saying were fraudulent claims, and I
But
looked
they'll
at
never get that back.
well,
They're going for it.
they're calling for it, and I believe they're calling for it by way of restitution as opposed to garnishments. But one way or the other, they are looking at clawing back the money from those 375,000. I mean, yeah, there's people who are living paycheck to paycheck and they owe $50,000 and they're 60 years old and on a fixed income living paycheck to paycheck and, you know, maybe don't have a good income. It might be tough to get back some of that money, absolutely. But there was an exorbitant amount in fraudulent claims under the UIA. But so for two reasons, there was a two-part reason to that. There was the self-attestation, which existed pre-COVID. Basically, you just self-attest or you say, hey, I was looking for work, I've been in, applied for jobs, I couldn't find any work. Well, if you guys remember, 4 years ago, you couldn't drive down the street without seeing a now hiring sign.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, so many people are unemployed.
Yeah.
And so it's like, oh, are you really putting in, you know, yourself looking everywhere for work, but I guess I'm blind because I don't see all these hiring signs. And so you have that circumstance mixed with the fact that the fraudulent claims division was effectively suspended during COVID. So they focused all of their UIA efforts into finding claims and sending out money and completely ignored their fraudulent claims division. And that was under Whitmer's UIA. It's just so logical to think that that would have happened and there would have been fraudulent claims. And it's just, I don't know, I feel like a third grader should know that that system was ripe for fraud. And maybe don't get rid of the fraudulent claims division of the UIA at this time. But they did.
Well, my understanding is that the unemployment is going to 440 and then 550 and then 660 over the next 3 years. The amount you get for unemployment is going to go to as much as $660 a week.
Okay, yeah, I'm not familiar with those numbers changes, but that'd be good to.
Really drastically go up. I mean, how
Yeah.
does the state pay for that?
UIA weekly dollar amount increasing. Question mark. Yeah, I don't want to look into that. Thank you for that. I had not heard that.
Hey, Steve, just so these guys know that like, number one, I'm a public school teacher here in the county. But number two, I'm vehemently against property taxes, okay? So would you mind answering a few questions about, like, the property tax, the Axmont tax, and then also what the discussion that you had with the superintendents and stuff? Because when I was at the fair and I stopped by the booth, the gentleman that I spoke to, you know, I said, okay, you know, how are we gonna make up for the schools and stuff, right? And so his response was, it's going to force the legislature to be more financially or fiscally responsible, okay? And then part two of that was this, he was there in the booth trying to advocate to get rid of property taxes on his second home. He was from Indiana, okay? And you know, he was complaining about how much tax he paid on his home, so I told him, I said, put it up for sale. There's gonna be 15 people behind you that won't mind paying that tax, right? But, you know, and then, you know, the brief conversation that we had in regards to how does this plan help schools in the future go after like villages and things like that when they want to do like capital improvements or because this goes well beyond operating budgets, right? I mean, you know, if we get rid of that, what's the makeup plan? Besides just that the legislature has to be more fiscally responsible. And
Okay.
again, I'm 100% against property tax. I want you guys to be clear, because it's the
Yeah.
most unfair tax we have, but.
Yeah, it's a tax on wealth with your property, and I would, which is one of the worst taxes. I would agree.
Well, you
You
get
should
taxed
own-
every single year on the same thing,
It should be something you own.
Yeah,
It's
correct.
your house.
and they can repo it anytime you decide not to pay it.
Right.
So it's not
So,
right.
I guess, ask my tax first, and then my proposal I was talking with the administrators about. For ask my tax, there's about, from property taxes, there's about a little over $3 billion that goes to the state. That is the state education tax. So that's specifically education related. And then there would be about $14 billion that stays locally. So you're looking at about $17 billion in property taxes. Actually, my tax is looking at getting rid of the full gambit, the 17 billion, using, it does explicitly say in the proposal, some revenue streams that would backfill some of that 17 billion and send some state money back down to the local level. But admittedly, not the full 17 billion. So what the individual said was correct, that it would force the state legislature to be more fiscally responsible with the decisions they make. Because in that scenario, if the locals are out all that money, the interest from society in Michigan is going to be, well, do we want the state of Michigan spending money recklessly, or do we want to backfill the locals and have some of that state revenue come back down from something other than property taxes, whether it's using income taxes or sales taxes or other generated revenue to backfill that void from losing out on property taxes. And some people will say, well, then that often comes with strings attached. That's a potential concern. Money from the state comes with strings attached.
Always.
If you look at the two numbers, if you look at right now, we'll say a roughly $81 billion budget plus $14 billion locally, you're looking at roughly $95 billion. If you include the local spend from the property taxes plus the state spend, it's roughly $95 billion. Under Ax My Tax, I don't like the potential of state strings, and I would vote against the state strings. But if you have that $81 billion at the state currently, and that revenue means a lot of that revenue is going to have to backfill the locals, my ideal world, but that would be you send that $14 billion back down to the locals, and then you're left with $67 billion for the state, a much leaner state budget. That's going to have to be a lot more fiscally responsible. The first place that I'd make cuts is on a lot of the state spending, not on the local end that needs to be backfilled. So I would rather a scenario that's backfill and have 67 billion spent by the state and backfill that 14, possibly have some strings attached that I don't want, than have 81 plus 14 equals a $95 billion budget. That would be my preference. So I do support Ax My Tax. And that's just in the short run, and then, things would have to be just deciphered through there.
Right, but
We can raise taxes.
what percentage of the total property taxes is it of the state overall budget? Or what percentage of property taxes is it of the state's total revenue, I guess it would be?
Well, to complicate it further, we did our whole raise equation, but I
Right.
largely left out the federal dollars. So the state budget's 81 billion, but about 30 billion of that is federal pass-through dollars, mostly from Medicaid. But you're looking at about a $49 billion roughly in that range in state revenue. Our state revenue is around 49 billion. So backfilling that 14 billion, you'd be left with more like 35 billion in state revenue for
So
everything.
it would be a substantial amount out of the state's total revenue.
And the first things I look at is don't give billions of dollars to the EV battery plant.
Oh, sure,
or
100.
Hundreds of millions to the
Absolutely,
ocean.
but that's not the overall move right now. Hopefully it's coming to an end. but-
Hopefully, yeah, I mean, they almost snuck in that Mundy Township one, and fortunately, that Sandisk situation is looking less like it's going to happen. I
Right.
mean, that was a big sticker amount for the taxpayers. But they.
But in the future, the schools, like, they won't be able to go for millages or anything like that either. under X my tax.
So, transitioning into, I guess, my proposal, under Ask My Tax, yeah, they'd have to find a different way. And there's other ways that the schools are funded. Again, income tax, sales tax, there's a lot of the school aid fund that comes from those other regions. Sin taxes, a lot of, segments of tax on beer and wine and liquor, there's some use taxes. The school aid fund gets money generated from all kinds of different angles. Property taxes are just one of those many forms.
But it's substantial.
Substantial, but not more than half, more like 25%. Depends how you look at it. I mean, if you look at the state education tax, it's less, but if you look at property tax level, the local property tax, not the state education tax part of your property tax, but the local property tax, it's a hefty amount of your property tax bill. But in terms of the proposal I have, it is a property tax exemption, not income tax and sales tax, but I'm looking at a property tax exemption for individuals who are not using the public school system. If they're not using the service, they shouldn't have to pay for it. Police and fire, hopefully we never need, police and or fire as taxpayers, but there's a chance our house could catch on fire, and, to pay services to your private community makes, to me, more logical sense than if you are not going to be using the public school system. So the idea is property tax exemption for all taxpayers not using the public schools. I'm looking at introducing that. I anticipate, I went into the Lions Den, again, glad to learn with the principals and superintendents, but that's where I was for 2 meetings today.
Would that have the unintended consequence of making people think twice about having kids, though?
I think it would have people.
Because we're struggling, the public schools are struggling with enrollment because nobody's having babies, and I can show you data all day and all night on that from our state health department, right? So we're struggling with population right now, with student population,
Yeah, homeschooling and private education would become far more affordable by that time, far more affordable. Places.
So would you suggest this instead of like a voucher program or
Yes.
something like that?
It gets back to the whole strings attached concept.
Sure, because that's what happened in Indiana.
Vouchers come with strings attached.
Correct. Right.
And property tax exemptions come as an exemption,
So I attended a Montville meeting last week, and they were bringing up how, because our St. Joseph County does road commission, where the county pays 50% of fixing a road and the township splits the other 50%. Has there been any thoughts about if property taxes get cut, how that's going to work? Is the state going to help with that? Because each township has their own millage for that as well.
There's a lot of money that was earmarked for for transportation from this budget, and so there's restricted funds and then there's the general fund. So a lot of that money is tied up for the roads. It is one of the bigger expenses. Schools are bigger. The biggest expenditure for the state budget is DHHS, specifically Medicaid, but the vast majority of that money is federal dollars. Second biggest is schools, over $20 billion. Roads are towards the higher end, looking at the highest single digits. It's around $8 or $9 billion, all said and done for the roads. But yeah, some counties do a 50-50 match with the township, some do 75-25. That's just a different relationship per county, but in St. Joseph here it is 50-50 with the township agreement. But there is a lot more money that is given to the local road agencies, which the cities and townships will, I guess, benefit from to the extent of how much money they get for their roads with that money that the local road agencies get. And there's some more money for MDOT, but it's substantially more to the locals. It was an aggressive increase, not as aggressive as Republicans had. Because Republicans were proposing going from about a $6.5 billion spend to a $9.9 billion spend in 1 year. That's roughly actually over a 50% increase in 1 year to our road funding. It's like, geez, just throwing money at a failing system versus, how can we spend that money more efficiently? There's there's certainly some aspects and elements, I believe, that we could spend existing dollars more efficiently, and I am working on that. But it ended up not being a $3.4 billion increase, it's closer to half of that, about $1.7 billion increase for the roads, and the locals will recognize some of that money coming. But they did lose out on some revenue sharing, because some of the money that was going to revenue sharing instead got reallocated for the roads. So it's kind of like it was earmarked. They're going to get more money for the roads, but they're going to have less money to spend as locals elsewhere. So overall, they might get more money because of how much money they get for the roads, but they're told you're going to be spending your money heavily on roads.
Well,
Yeah.
well, one thing that, you may not be able to answer this, but it occurs to me that higher education, universities and colleges get state money. So how much of the budget is allocated to K through 12 versus the higher education? Now, most places, they charge tuition to go, and everybody that went to college pays that tuition, okay? And also pays for their books and pays for their room and board. So I just want to know how much of that budget is allocated to state university colleges.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, I believe it's $2.4 billion for higher education, but it's closer to $21 billion for K through 12.
Okay.
It's close to 90% K through 12, and that's state money.
Yeah.
The federal dollars, how much federal money goes to the universities, I don't have as much information on,
Right.
but it's substantially more to K through 12. But the universities and community colleges also do get their chunks from the state budget as well, but it is much smaller number than the K through 12
Okay.
system, in the $2.4 billion range.
When you were talking about school funding, I did hear you mention the lottery office. 20, 30 years ago, when we voted on bringing the lottery, it was to fund schools, our taxes were supposed to go in half and all that. So what has become of the lottery money?
Yeah, let's see if I can find that here, but I believe lottery money, some of it goes to the schools.
Somehow.
Let's see. See if I can find it on a little sheet here. Here's some money from individual income tax, liquor, beer, wine tax, use tax, sales tax, state education tax. Oh, lottery transfer, all. 1.27 billion. Net proceeds after prizes / administration is 1.27 billion, and that was for fiscal year 24, 2025.
Oh, that just doesn't sound like much compared to what they pay out in
Yeah, lottery transfer, so, I mean, maybe they pay out $2 billion for the year and 1.27, I don't know the exact numbers, but I guess you had your big prize, and then I'm assuming, I don't know, I don't do lotteries, but 1.27 billion.
Going back to the roads, is the state coming up with a formula or anything to have electric cars pay for a portion of road use?
Yeah, we already have that, there's conversations about doing it differently, but right now your vehicle registration is higher for, it's higher for hybrids and it's higher for entirely electric, and so it's like 20%, I don't know what the exact amount higher is, but they pay higher upfront for the year for their tab than those of us who don't use electric, and that's supposed to be comparable, but of course somebody who's driving 50,000 miles per year would be getting a net benefit from traveling so much and just paying that registration increased fee up front, whereas somebody who stays at home or stays in their community and only goes 2,000 miles, that individual with an electric vehicle would be paying more than it would be at the pump because they hardly ever travel and they had to pay that
There's
increased
no
registration.
discussion about changing it to use mileage use?
There is, the biggest concern from conservatives would be potential tracking. There are some states that are trying to and claiming that they have ways to track mileage that you travel without having to use your GPS knowledge of where you've been. So that is being explored by other states and ours as well. Actually, the lobbyists, when they come and talk about that, they are very, like, we know it's not going to get done now, but we're starting a conversation for down the road. Like, they've got like a 5 or 10 year plan to do something like what you're talking about, and they just like, we're not going to have the votes today, we understand that, but we want to start making the arguments. That's how they pitch it in the last year or two. And so, anyway, that is being discussed, and the biggest concern is being tracked with that. Some people aren't gonna want, and it's not government's business where I've gone, how many miles I'm putting in to get where, and, not having the government surveillance state type of concerns.
Are they talking about raising the sales tax?
I think by this point, our decision is largely made with this budget. The increases we had are what we had from decoupling from the Big Beautiful Bill and from the 24% wholesale on marijuana. Those decisions are largely made. I don't think that other streams like that the governor may have proposed in the past are necessarily on the table for the next foreseeable future. Maybe when we start getting into next year's budget conversations, it might rise to the table again more, but I don't envision that. I do envision conversation because I voted yes on the House's plan for the budget months ago, which was $78.5 billion was the proposal. It was lean, getting rid of a lot of those big corporate, EV battery plant type of corporate handouts. It had some of that good stuff in there. It had some good transparency built into our proposed House budget. Just as a reminder, we have the House budget, the Senate budget, and the governor's budget. We all have our own 3 plans that we do as an initial phase. And then you take those 3 plans and you mesh them together and negotiate and seek a consensus between the 3. I voted yes on the Republican-controlled House plan months ago, and then I voted no on the overall plan once they brought the 3 of them together. And but when I was yes on that, part of the conversation was I wanted to hear talk about property tax relief for the people of Michigan, and that was well received by leadership. That will be a conversation here in the near future. That doesn't mean it's going to get across the finish line though, because the Democrats can just sit on it in the Senate. But I'm like, I want to see property. That doesn't mean my public school property tax exemption concept, if you're not using the public schools, is what's going to move forward. I doubt that that's what it'll be through the House. It'll probably be something else. Actually, it might be getting rid of that 6 mils for the state education tax. That's one of the main things I'm looking at, which is just that one small portion, about $3 billion of the overall much bigger apparatus for the public schools.
So back to revenue, revenue for the state, 'cause that's what you were talking about. Did they see an effect, have we lost revenue due to schools opening before Labor Day and losing that tourism thing?
That is always the argument, and my general perspective was what's more important, tourism or the education of our kids. And if a school district wants to start before Labor Day, that's how you want to do it, whether it's a public school or a private school. I want them to be able to make that decision without putting too much of an interest on tourism. That's my perspective. But there are a lot of schools, because you still are supposed to start after Labor Day, but there's so many school districts who get the exemption. So many do. And it's more and more every year. 5 years ago it was probably something like 100 or something, and now it's like 1,000. I mean, it's really ballooned how many schools are starting before Labor Day. In terms of what impact that's had on tourism, I don't have those numbers, but maybe there's less on tourism over the summer months there, but maybe they go to a fall baseball game, go to the Tigers game instead, like a week or 2 ago, and we were still able to. Bummer we can't go this week to the Tigers game, but lost in Game 5 there for those of you who were following. But yeah, they might have spent the money elsewhere, so I don't know what the overall impact
Well, I meant
So I-
just the sales tax, though.
Yeah.
Affect the sales tax.
Do you think you know something on the?
Well, yeah, parents don't respect attendance with their kids like they used to. So if they want to go, let me just tell you that if they want to go on vacation, they take their kids. They just call into the schools, and there's no real truancy and stuff anymore. I'll just leave it at that. There really is not. So if they want to go on vacation, they still do it. But yeah.
In my experience, just to talk in terms of attendance at the schools, my best experience is from my wife on that. At Cassopolis, the kids generally are present more. I think probably a lot in our area probably are showing up at a better rate. But I trust
Since
that's
COVID, attendance is spectacular right now. Like
yeah.
100% true.
When she was at Battle Creek Public School, she had one of her smallest classes with 15 students. And she sent me a text one day, 5 minutes into the period. She said, "I have 1 student in the classroom right now."
I got down to 6 kids. So.
Why?
But if you really want to look at that, really, you know, schools have to be in 180 days and like 20,000 hours or something like that. Right? 2,000, you know, yeah, exactly. But like, if you really want to allow schools to flex on that, you know, I mean, this whole Labor Day, start before Labor Day so you can get out by Memorial Day and stuff, that's whatever. But if you really want to allow schools to flex, let them go to 4 days a week, 8 hours a day, you know, something like that. But because we're locked into the number of days and hours, there's no flexibility. I mean, you could save on busing, you could eat the food, like all kinds of things. But if you would rethink the number of days and hours, that would be amazing. Allow locals, because I understand in the UP there are some waivers because of distance to schools and stuff. So, and they do like 4-day school weeks.
Yeah.
So.
I got a kid that works for me, that goes to Poland 2 days a week, and he's off 3 days. He's a smart kid. He's been homeschooled up to this point, and but he only has to go to school. And he does his work on the internet.
It's at Cullen High School.
They call him schools. He's a 16-year-old.
I say that's what we do. I do online public school, and my daughter has from midnight to midnight to do her assignments. She has spent a total of 6.1 hours in school that whole day.
So the model is already there. It's just public schools are locked in,
Okay.
you know, to the days plus hours. So.
But he learns way more from working for construction than he would ever learn in school. So he's learned, and his parents are very.
You may not learn about all 74 genders or whatever.
Yeah. But he does know how to drive a nail and grade concrete. So you know he never got that in school because they don't have shop or anything. So he knows how to run a tape over. And I guarantee nobody else at home knows how to run a tape over. And he was taught that real quick. So.
Or I've heard of it.
Yeah, or heard of it even.
Anything else? Yes.
I just have a random question. So, at one of the other board meetings I went to recently, they discussed the solar panel power banks that is being placed at all, like the state's trying to regulate where you can place them and stuff like that. And I was told you and Mr. Lindsay voted no on it. Can you give more information on that?
Yeah, so there's a Green New Deal type of concept where Democrats are wanting to, the theory is take away local control and have a state board, the MPSC, get to dictate where these go in and where they don't go in, and they make those decisions. So that was Public Act 233 and 235, and there are a lot of people in the community who have been frustrated by some of the things that are happening in our community, and people were told to reach out to us. Just fine, absolutely reach out to us, but I feel like the way that was pitched, at least at first, was like, well, if you're unhappy, because they are right, the local control is taken away by an unelected board at the state level. That is true, but it's just like, well, if you don't like this, then reach out to your state rep and your state senator, and it's just like, well, you're missing the fact that we voted the way people would have wanted us to vote in this circumstance, and these people who were upset are told to reach out to us to fix it when it's something that we voted no on the creation of, and it kind of gives people this negative viewpoint of Senator Lindsay and myself. And yeah, but it is a state decision, so technically it is us to talk to, but every single Democrat voted for it, and every single Republican voted against it, and the Democrats have control of the Senate, and they have the governor, and all of them want it. So Senator Lindsay, who's in the minority, they're not going to get the votes in the Senate. The Senate leadership's not going to bring it up for a vote. We could, in theory, get a vote out of the House, and I would support repealing Public Act 233 and 235. So I'm a yes on that, but the path to victory in terms of reverting back to how it was, it's just simply not there with the Democrat control of the Senate. So I understand everybody's frustration, and but it was Democrat-induced, that time legislatively. Sometimes it's unelected bureaucrats and codes and regulations that are imposed on society from unelecteds, but that was Democrat legislators for PA 233 and 235, and we just don't have the political makeup to.
Is there a way to put brakes on it until after the election?
If you can get the Democrats on board.
I mean, to kind of
so we can hopefully get new stuff in there and then
Those
override it?
public acts are already in effect.
Uh-huh.
Does it require state money to implement?
This is Green New Deal. This isn't a state funding thing, this is policy. MPSC, that board making these decisions in terms of where projects go and where they don't
So
go.
it's private money that's funding this.
It's subsidized money. All Green New Deal stuff is subsidized by the state or the federal.
There's certainly subsidies with overall, yeah. And I don't know specifics in terms of BESS, BESS, that's the big one I'm hearing in the community up in Lockport Township. But yeah, I'm sure they're getting some type of Green New Deal subsidies, and then the MPSC is saying, local community, you have to take this subsidized Green New Deal project, like to store EV batteries in a community. It's that type of thing that's coming on, absolutely. So it's Green New Deal, Democrat, they had a trifecta last term, elections have consequences, and they got something they wanted, and
So if it's federal Green New Deal stuff,
but this is state.
it is state? So
This Public Act 233 and 235 is
that's
state.
state.
And that's why the locals are saying reach out to state,
Okay,
or to Rep. Carra and Senator Lindsay.
well, okay.
And I did talk with a couple of them who were, kind of pitching it in that way, and I had a good conversation with them about, how I feel like that leaves a negative image in people in the community's
Yeah.
mind that this is our fault, when it's something where they agree with us on, and would say, hey, I thank you for your vote, I just wish the Democrats wouldn't have done this to us. It would be nice if they had a more accurate depiction of Senator Lindsay and myself from it, but they understand the point, and there were people who were at some of those meetings who did help to clarify, including elected officials. Nowicki, she's on the planning commission, she's one of them who made it clear that we had voted no as the people would have wanted, and so, the truth, and God willing, in most circumstances, the truth gets out there, and I think largely it is getting out there in terms of any ill will towards Senator Lindsay or me over that is misguided, and I think the truth in that is prevailing.
Just wish there was some way we could put it around a little bit, Jilly.
If you can convince 20 Democrats in the Senate,
Yeah, I understand.
How many more Democrats in the Senate than Republicans?
so it's 38 senators. It was 20 to 18. Now it's technically 19-18, so technically it's 19 because this 35th Senate district is vacant still. And Whitmer's been dragging her feet. She finally announced like 3 or 4 weeks ago the election's going to be general elections in May of next year. So almost a year and a half of vacancy for that Senate.
We could have done it in November.
They could have done it so much.
time.
It was ridiculous. But she dragged her feet because it's a competitive district, and they didn't want 19-19. They didn't want to take that chance. They did not want that chance.
Just one last question. Is there any talk of the tariff money from the federal government coming towards the states?
The tariff money?
Supposedly all this tariff money seems to be coming in.
Yeah, I don't remember any specifics on how tariff money would be coming to the states, but there's federal pass-through dollars here and there, so to the extent that the federal government gets more money from the tariffs, there's federal money that comes from Medicaid or otherwise, and whether it's earmarked to anything specific or just overall goes to the revenue that the federal government has, that minimum does that.
Because I would think like Detroit would generate a lot of tariff money because of the auto industry.
Right, yeah. Yeah, so I don't know the specifics, there might be a little bit better an answer on that, but so. Oh, you're saying time's up?
No.
Oh, well,
I was
it's,
just gonna say, if you go back to the superintendents again, think about that 180 and 2,000 hours as a,
and I don't know if it's 2,000, but it's definitely not 20,000.
yeah, I was exaggerating
Yeah,
obviously,
yeah.
but you know what I mean? Like if you go back with the idea of the exemption, which is an interesting idea, offer them some flexibility on that, that we'll get rid, like I don't know how you would undo it, right? But again, the model is there to where, it doesn't make sense like it used to maybe at one time with all these different options that you have,
There's too many imposed regulations by the state, whether it's, if we have a certain number of hours for the year as opposed to 180 days and hours, just do these hours how you see fit, maybe go into the summer a little bit longer, but have more Fridays off, longer days, Mondays through Thursdays, but those, those long
Yeah, 'cause
weekends here and there.
We can count TD days now. We get to count TD days when the kids aren't even in attendance, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I only had one quick question that had to do with taxes.
yes,
The first three, the tips, the social security, and the overtime taxes and stuff, that is on the state, that's on the state income tax, right?
yeah, that's.
It's applying to the state income tax. There was a headline, I didn't read the whole article, about this may be one of those sunset things. Is it gonna go away after 3 or 4 years or something?
I don't know with those. I know those other sunset ones were largely extended indefinitely.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if this Big Beautiful Bill thing would sunset. In theory, when you do budgets,
Yeah.
policy that's built into some budget
Yeah.
concept does only last, for a year or a few years. So it very well may sunset. My gut tells me yes, but my knowledge tells me I don't know the answer. Good question.
All right.
Good question. I want to know if that, it's 179 million
Yeah.
projected, and then it does that. Seems like it would have to, based on it being part of budget appropriation.
I just read it somewhere that, it's not a permanent stay.
Probably correct. Well,
Thank you.
yeah, enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for dealing with me being a little bit late. I had to find a time to meet with the public school administrators, and 5 to 6 today, this evening was what made the most sense. 5 to 6 today is my best chance, and I'm rushing here. So I did it out in 3 Rivers, so it's central in my district, because I've got most of the council. So anyway, that is it for this week. Thank you for dealing with my grades equation. I guess I'm cautiously optimistic that it might be a cool new equation in economics moving forward, but people haven't really been all that excited about